I also want to thank the university for inviting me here today. I understand that they took this process of finding a keynote very seriously. They looked for the brightest, they looked for the smartest of the alums, and fortunately for me, all of those people are on vacation. So they whittled down their search to the tallest and the cheapest, and here I am. That's right. But please don't let the fact that I come at a discount make you think that I don't have anything valuable to offer you. I assure you that I do. And even if I didn't, for what I paid for college and what you're about to pay for college, I think it's best that we all just fake it, right? I too see some parents starting to quiver in the back of the room. But in all seriousness, school really is an investment. Let's not be confused about that, both in yourself and in your future. And just like the 401k that most of you will start filling after graduation, the more you put into it now, the more you will get out of it later. Unless, of course, your financial advisor is my financial advisor. But what I mean by that is that college and grad school aren't just valuable because of the diploma that you leave with. If you take a little bit of my advice, it can be very valuable for you down the road as well. In the short term, there is the education itself. Unless you're a sociology major like I was, you might actually leave with a degree worth something. I'm just kidding. But like it or not, a college degree is the new standard of job entry in the United States. You simply can't compete with other candidates without one, especially if you want to enter the STEM professions like science, technology, engineering, and math. Now I'm going to level with you. I do not like the high cost of higher education in the United States. But I can assure you that Dr. Davison and other folks at MSU are trying as hard as they can to get the cost of college in Colorado reduced. For your sake, I hope she gets that done next week before classes start. But for whatever the cost, I really do believe that an MSU education is still worth the expense. So what is worth? Well, worth means having something of a particular value. In the case of college, worth is everything that the school is going to provide you. The professors, the curriculum, the technology, the buildings, the bus pass, and yes, eventually the degree. All of those things have a quantifiable value. We can count the costs, we can look at the salaries, we can see the rent, we can see the bus rides, etc., etc. But here's something very interesting. What is the definition of value? The definition of value is the usefulness of something. And the value you derive from getting your education really is something only you can create. Nobody has a leg up on you in the value department. I truly believe that someone from MSU can have just as valuable a degree as someone from Harvard, as someone from Yale, and as the distinguished gentleman from Oxford. That's because the value of your degree is totally up to you. How useful and thus how valuable this thing is going to become is dependent on you and what you do over the next few years. And I know this because my story is proof. I agree with the baby. I've been an entrepreneur for over 20 years, but I've only been a successful entrepreneur for the last 10 years. And the reasons for that I will reveal at the very end of this speech so that you don't get up and leave right now. So let's go ahead and set the timer for 3 hours. Are we ready? I grew up very poor. My mother got pregnant with me when she was 15, and by the time she was 20, she was a single mother of 3 boys. We lived in a small town, population 13, of which 4 were my family. Not only did we receive government cheese, we received all the government stuff. Chicken in a can, milk in a box, Christmas presents, food stamps. I'm sure some of you know what I'm talking about. As a young man, I became keenly aware of the differences between me and my classmates. Not that they just had Nikes while I had Payless, or that they had Nintendos while I had the front lawn, but in the way that their parents talked to them about the future, talked to them about college, and talked to them about what they could be. They talked about college as if it were automatic. They had college funds. And they talked with their kids about what they wanted to be when they grew up as if all things were possible. But in my house, nobody talked about college or of the possibilities. We were all just trying to survive. In the 3rd grade, we moved to a bigger town where a neighbor kid had a paper route. One Christmas, he asked me to cover for him while him and his family went on a Christmas vacation. When he got back, he decided he didn't want the paper route anymore and asked me if I'd like to take it over. I took the job, and for the first time in my life, I realized some sort of financial independence. It wasn't most, but it was symbolic because I had a baseball card collection which I could now afford to curate. What I quickly realized about the paper route was that the more papers I delivered, the more money I made. And thus, the more people I could get to subscribe to the paper, the bigger my paycheck. So I busted my ass on nights and weekends, walking all through the neighborhood, selling subscriptions, which I also made a commission on. And when I was tapped out, I decided to move on to other kids' neighborhoods and start selling on other kids' routes. I was celebrated by the newspaper company, and I was scorned by the kids with other paper routes because they now had so many deliveries they couldn't do it on their bikes. They had to pull wagons, and they had to employ their little brothers to help. I'm not kidding when I say as a 5th grader, I was the top producing newspaper subscription salesman in the area. I was so good, in fact, that the adults would take me to other towns to sell. It's pretty incredible. Now listen to this. We lived in a town that actually had 2 newspapers, an afternoon newspaper which was called the Daily News, which I delivered at 4 p.m. every day, and a morning newspaper called the Lewiston Morning Tribune, which went out about 4 a.m. every day. One day I had this light bulb moment where I realized that if I delivered for both and I sold for both, I could double my income. And so I did on the same route. I'd take one paper, I'd tout it to my current subscribers and tell them that the sports coverage wasn't as good as the other one. I'd take the other one and tell those other subscribers that the coupons and the discounts weren't as good as the other one. And similarly, on nights and weekends, I'd sell for both the Daily News and the Lewiston Morning Tribune, and I did equally well for both of them. I will just say I won a lot of Sizzler Steakhouse gift cards. Now, that wasn't an entrepreneurial adventure per se. That would start the following year when I started breeding feeder mice for the snakes at the local pet store. But what this job taught me was that the amount of effort I put into something could actually positively correlate to the value I got out of it. And for me, that value was cold, hard cash and the independence that money afforded a poor kid like me. Money isn't everything is something that usually people with money say. But as B.B. King always said, I've been rich and I've been poor and I like rich better. Same. I wasn't the only kid selling newspapers all those nights, but I was the only kid who asked if I could follow the adults around, if I could open the papers and see what was different. I was the only kid reading the headlines to understand the content. I was putting in the extra effort. I was doing the little things that were adding up to incredible value. And that's the lesson here as you think about what you want to get out of your education. How much more valuable can you make this thing than what it's actually worth? I kept those paper routes all the way through 8th grade. And about that time, I started to realize that being a business owner might actually be my way out of poverty. And a few years later, I started opening my own businesses. And this is where the story gets a little bit sadder. For as tall as I am, and as smart as I am, and as cheap as I am, I couldn't find a way to make those businesses work. From the time I was 16 until the time I was 26, I started business after business. All of those I burnt down to the ground. I had a skateboard and snowboard shop, I had 2 coffee shops, I had a record label, and I had a handful of smaller stop and start projects. By the time I moved to Colorado in 2004, I was really starting to wonder if all those people who told me I would never amount to anything might be right. I was really starting to wonder if I had what it took to become a successful entrepreneur. And I'm going to tell you very honestly that my decision to come back to college and to attend MSU was more out of a conciliatory feeling of defeat than because of any intention to create value in my own life. But in college, my natural instincts kicked in. I started to dig in and I started to take advantage of everything at my disposal. I met a student whose brother managed a valet parking company. I got a job there. I joined the MSU marketing club. I got the idea to sell advertising on valet tickets. And through the marketing club, I won an award from the American Marketing Association for that idea. I turned that idea into a business, and by the end of my first year at Metro, I had walked out of a sales meeting with a $14,000 commission check for one of my valet ticket advertising campaigns. The year before that, the year I decided to move to Denver, I'd filed a tax return for about $11,000. But here I was 12 months removed from my previous life, and I had just made in a single transaction more money than I had made the previous year. What I didn't know then and have only been able to articulate recently was that it wasn't that I didn't have what it takes to be a successful entrepreneur, it's that I didn't have who it takes to be a successful entrepreneur. See, in college, not only did I have exposure to other students with other great ideas, but I had exposure to professors who could help turn my ideas into executable plans. And equally important, I had access to members of the business community that had relationships with the school who saw that I just needed a little bit of mentorship to get my ship floating in the right direction. This experience in college was amazing because remember, I had spent 10 years building and destroying everything I had touched. I was pretty beat up, and I couldn't tell the difference anymore between my business failures and my failures as a person. I didn't know that those 10 years would actually become invaluable and necessary for the next 10 years of my life and the abundance in entrepreneurship that I would come to enjoy. You've got to understand, at the end of your term, whether it's a graduate degree or a bachelor's degree, this university is going to hand you a diploma. But they can't hand you value. Only you can create that. So what I would encourage you to do is to commit yourselves to get as much value out of this university experience as you can. Commit yourselves to have an equally great story to tell future Roadrunners when you're an alum. Who's willing to give a speech to anyone for a few bucks? My value didn't just start at the marketing club. I was in a number of clubs. I was a tutor. I was even a radio DJ at Met Radio. In fact, I was so committed to getting the most value out of my Metro degree that I politely asked my wife if she wouldn't mind me leaving the hospital and our newborn son so I could go to campus for my 2 p.m. show. More importantly, my value didn't just stop while I was in school. Remember, at the beginning of this speech, when we were just strangers and not the friends that we are now, I told you that the value of your degree would persist long after you left college. If you take my advice, it will. The relationships I made as a student have served me very well as an adult. I have people I went to school on who I can still count on for great advice. I have professors I still occasionally rib online, and I have a network of mentors I developed a long time ago. All of these connections in some form or another have been responsible for my success today. Because of who I had, today I own a number of businesses. I've created dozens of jobs and generated millions of dollars in economic value. Because of this, a woman I was in marketing club with saw me randomly at an entrepreneurship event. She had ended up being hired by Metro after her graduation, and as luck would have it, it was this very woman who ended up being the person who would hire me a few years later when I finished graduate school. So to her, Cindy, I'm very thankful because that will undoubtedly go down as one of my proudest personal moments. It's the first day that I stepped up to the lectern and started giving back to MSU as an adjunct professor. The rest of that semester will go down as the most stressful time in history, of my personal history. But we got to figure it out. It took 4 years, but we got to figure it out. But having been both a student and a professor here, I do believe I have some special insight that also might prove valuable to you. I can appreciate that not every kid is going to fall in love with every subject, and that some of you might be trying to survive and pass classes, and for me that was 2 times through macroeconomics, so I can certainly appreciate that. I never graded anybody poorly because they lacked enthusiasm for my coursework. But what did drive me crazy, and what really upset me, were those students who seemed to have a natural interest in my subjects, who did grade A work, but refused to push themselves further, refused to reach their full potential. Whatever you discover, whatever you might fall in love with here at Metro, when you find it, please promise me that you won't just do good enough. Promise me that you won't just do the bare minimum to get the best grade, but dig in. Remember 5th grade Travis, covered in newspaper print, trying to figure out how to exploit one newspaper over the other for more sales. Keep in mind the lessons I learned and the people that I met who made the last 10 years of my life truly incredible. Remember that the college experience is about more than just passing classes. Now, I'm very fortunate. I grew up to be exactly who I had in mind. And it wasn't always like that, and I wasn't always sure it was going to happen. But it didn't happen alone. I think all of us in this auditorium can be successful. Any of us can do the 80% necessary to make sure that we don't starve to death. But it's that extra 20%. It's the friendships, the teachers, the mentors, the clubs, the radio stations, the extra work, the finding your passion and pushing yourself to do more than what is expected of you. It is that creates value and assures you that no matter what you actually pay for this degree, no matter what it's worth, its value will always be priceless. Finally, I want to say that the measure of a great university isn't what you leave knowing, but rather how much more you start to question. So make me one last promise. Promise me you'll leave college a much more curious person than the one who arrived. Commit yourself to a willingness to listen to new ideas and challenge old ones, because Lord knows we need it more than ever right now. I want to thank you for having me, and I want to say one more thing. Welcome to the Roadrunner family. You belong here. Go Roadrunners. Thank you. Thank you.